Hello, beautiful soul, and welcome to the SONGA Show, a space for those who are devoted to the awakening of humanity. We'll explore what it means to live a spiritually guided, purpose-driven life that's rooted in harmony with the planet. Through soulful conversations, transformational teachings, and stories from conscious creators, we'll dive into what it really looks like to live from embodied truth, to serve from your heart, and to reimagine a world full of wonder, beauty, and awe. If you're here to leave a legacy of abundance on earth, you're in the right place. So before we begin, let's take a moment to arrive together. Gently close your eyes. Inhale deeply through the nose and exhale slowly through the mouth, letting go of anything that you're carrying from the day, allowing your body to soften and receive the wisdom that's about to be shared. Feel yourself come home to the present moment, and let's begin. Hey, you guys, this is Kristi, your host of the SONGA Show, and today I'm here with Matt Richards from Tierramor in beautiful Costa Rica. Matt and I actually got connected through friends, and I went to an event at their property, and it was just one of the most incredible overnight experiences in nature. And we got to wake up to the sunrise with Nessie Gomez singing us in at dawn. And it was just so special, so special. So I've been really excited to talk to Matt and get to know his story more. So welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, some of the things that we focus on is talking about conscious creation. And Matt, how many acres is the Tierramor property in Costa Rica? You guys have been really consciously creating with the land out there and doing some beautiful things.
Yeah, it's about 800 acres now.
Wow. So they're regenerating about 800 acres and really working in harmony to find balance with nature, human beings, and also even bringing some technology in, which is different from some regenerative properties. What I would love to do, though, is maybe take it back to the beginning, because you did not start off in regenerative land. Where would you like to start this story? Because I can't wait to hear. You were telling me that you were living in California?
Yeah, I'm in California, born and raised. I grew up in a little town called Alamo, which is just east of Berkeley, Oakland, in the Bay Area, essentially. And yeah, I just grew up loving nature. I grew up, like, when I wasn't watching cartoons, I was watching nature shows. I love them. I just felt really connected to the animals. And I think David Attenborough really played like a pretty big role, frankly, in my young childhood and bringing me into that experience of nature and why it's so important, why it should be protected. And that meme really stayed with me all the way through college, where I did certain things that were meaningful to me for the environment. Like, I was part of the Surf Rider Club, and I was thinking about joining the Peace Corps, and I didn't actually do that. Decided to dive headfirst into business. But yeah, nature's definitely been a big part of things for me. And after my burnout, I'll just skip to the from college to my burnout, which was after working in Silicon Valley for about 7 or 8 years doing like online media. I just had a proper burnout and was like, okay, I gotta change something. This is just not working. I was like burning both ends of the candle, as it were. And yeah, I decided to go back to what was really meaningful for me. And that was sustainability. That was learning to find connection and understanding and balance with the natural world, right? And so I just left this cushy job in Silicon Valley, this big house, beautiful girlfriend, all that stuff. I just was like, okay, I'm going to go back to school
Can we pause? What were you thinking back then when you had the beautiful house, you had the beautiful girlfriend, cushy job, but was it terrifying to leave? Was it exciting? What was the entry to the transition?
Yeah, yes, I would say. It was many different things. There was a certain despair, a certain hopelessness, a certain, I think, a knowing also that there was more than this, that there was something beyond what was in front of me and what was it within my bubble. Somehow I knew that intuitively, and I thankfully had the courage and the resources and the privilege in order to cut and be like, okay, I can do this. I'd saved up enough from working pretty hard for that time that I was there. And I said, okay, I'm just going to take what I have and I'm going to go back to school because I really I wanted to find something else. I had no idea what it was. And so I left from San Francisco and went to Denmark, of all places. I know.
Whoa.
Yeah. My girlfriend at the time was half Danish. And so she got her tuition for free. And so it was like a kind of a 2-for-1 deal for us, basically. Left everything else behind, but kept the beautiful girlfriend. But to really like hone in on your question, it was really despair that was like, okay, I don't have that many options in front of me in like my existing worldview and in my existing understanding of what's possible. And I knew that the world is a huge place. The world is just, there's so many different realities out there. There's so much to explore. I had this sort of like innate knowing that there has to be more than this, right? But it required that sort of severing, that sort of cutting, that sort of being like, okay, no. And also like a humbling to let go, to leave my ego on the table, to be like, I'm not this like director pushing into VP of this company that just got bought by Disney. And I'm going to leave all that behind and be like, I don't know what I am. I'm a dude at school who might be a little bit more arrogant than the other 20 somethings in school because he's got a little more experience or something like that. But that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. And so it was really just, it was a humbling process for sure. It really was. And
Was there anything really difficult for you to let go of? Like for some people, it might be more security. For some people, it's actually just the things. For other people, it's the title. Like what was was there anything you were really attached to that took some like unwinding, or was it the despair big enough to just go, you know what, I'm done?
I think the despair was big enough for me, honestly. Yeah, looking back, it was significant enough to make the jump. The hardest thing was leaving my friends and leaving my dad, who's in the Bay Area, and going halfway across the world to Europe to see what happens. And that was hard.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once you went to Denmark, what did you discover there?
I was really curious about Denmark because I'd always heard so much about like how great their social system is and like how good the government is and how amazing Scandinavia in general is, like how good it is for the people that live there and how it's like a functional socialist country. And I went there and I was like, oh yeah, actually a lot of this is true. It's really great for the people that are there. Generally speaking, they have a pretty good balance between like capitalistic endeavor and also this like social package that can support people in more difficult times. It's not perfect. No place is. Taxes are brutal, maybe not worse than California actually, but brutal irrespective. Yeah, but what really, that was like just like from an anthropological perspective, that's what drew me there. But really the reason that I went there was because I was pursuing a degree in sustainability. And it's this program there that is really about like how to craft policy, how to craft regulation for the EU or for a developing country that needs assistance with developing good policy. And I thought Denmark was actually a pretty good place to do that. And I think it probably was. What I learned actually, though, was that I am not interested in that at all. It is not good for me at all to be sitting there thinking about like all of the details in this huge legal document and like crafting every little detail. I was like, no way. Like that's not my personality at all. I felt also, to be fair, there was this thing called COP15 happening during the time that I was there. I don't know if you remember, but it was like Barack Obama was president. He was going to come. Greenpeace was there. It's like this big climate conference in Copenhagen while I was studying sustainability. It was a like big thing, and everybody in my university was so excited about it. And he was going to come and save the world. We were going to sign this agreement. It was going to be amazing. And then nothing happened. It was just like all the air went out. Like he came, went, conference ended, and nothing happened at all. And I was like, man, if I had put so much energy and time into something that I know that there were people that were working for months, if not years, on an agreement in just the hopes that he and the other relevant people around the world would sign to make some progress towards the climate situation that we're in, I felt incredibly disempowered in that situation, in that imaginal situation, being like, my God, am I pointing my energy towards a pursuit where I'm going to like potentially just be like this tiny little cog in a massive machine? It made me feel also extremely powerless, actually, where I was like, I don't want to do this. So I left again. I did another left turn. I had a 2-year visa, and I was supposed to spend another, I don't know, I think like $17,000 on tuition for the second year of my master's. And I just took that, and I took the year that I had left on my visa, and I traveled around Europe, exploring different permaculture, like getting my permaculture degree from a PDC. And then I lived in many different communities because I was learning so much about permaculture. I was discovering so much like about the theoretical aspect of it and how it was like a decentralized and bottom up perspective and on how to actually enact change in this world.
And for those who don't know, can you describe permaculture from your perspective? You don't need the definition, but what would you share about permaculture, just for those tuning in that this is like a new revelation?
Sure. Yeah. Permaculture, as the name sounds, is like you can hear permanent as the first part of it and then culture after that, right? So people usually think about, oh, it's like cute gardening. And certainly gardening is a part of it, right? 100% is a big part of it. But really, it's about what does permanency in culture actually look like? So it's like the acknowledgement that we are living in an impermanent culture in the way that we're living in relationship with the earth right now. So it's an attempt to like systemically embody a new way of relating to our lived environment through design, conscious design, and then applying those principles to where it is that we are and in our lived experience.
I love that. If you think about that in terms of relationship, how do you treat someone if you're in a very temporary, fleeting relationship versus how do you show up to that relationship if you feel like they're there permanently? And what is our relationship with the earth? And how would we view things differently if we felt, okay, we were going to design this for us to be here for a long time and for the earth to be here symbiotically?
Mm.
I love that perspective. Thank you so much for sharing the relationship piece.
Yeah, sure, of course. And something else that I realized around that time was actually the importance of community as well, not just from a social perspective, but because what I was learning is that a lot of people were implementing permaculture from usually like solo farmsteading types of situations where single families would be responsible for a half acre, an acre 7-10 acres, something like that. And then they would be spending a lot of time and effort actually cultivating this land, right? Which people have been doing for millennia. There's a certain difference to how they do it now, which is generally speaking polycultural oriented, but not always. But what I realized is that if one was to spend so much time and effort just in their own like solo little homestead, that you would actually be very difficult to hold down like a specialized way of earning income, right? A way of actually being productive in the matrix that we're in right now, right? However, in a community setting where you have people who are holding down different aspects of what's necessary for permaculture to actually thrive, I realized, wow, actually, if some people are really focused on that because that's what their joy is and that's where their highest love is, wants to be poured into, great. Some other people can also be focused on just like bringing in revenue because they're great at coaching people or because they're great at engineering or whatever, right? And these things can work symbiotically so people can be nourished on a resilient local level and also be supported within the larger environment that we live in, a capitalist society. It wasn't either or. It was really like, oh, okay, what does it look like to combine both of these things? Yeah, in a functional way.
So where were some of the places that you hit on your journey, these sustainable permaculture communities?
Yes, many different ones.
Did any stories or experiences stand out before we move on?
Oh boy, yeah. How
I
much
just gotta
time?
ask. Come
Yeah.
on.
Yeah. So I have a laundry list of places that I went to. Some of the ones that I spent the most time at was a place called Tamera in Portugal, which was very interesting. And I went there because of Sepp Holzer's work and his work with water landscape. And I learned a lot more than just permaculture when I was in Tamera, because it's actually a social research project, which happens to also then do things like permaculture and many other things. I also lived in a place called Oroville, had a reforestation project there called Sodana Forest for a few months. I visited Australia and like the Permaculture Research Institute. I lived for a year in Schloss Blumenthal in Bavaria, lived in La Kea, which is a permaculture community in Hawaii. Yeah, so I mean, I've also traveled many other places, but those are like some of the ones where I spent the most time and put the most effort into.
I've noticed from visiting different intentional communities of different kinds that there's a very different experience based on the intention of why they're gathering. And you mentioned the social aspect of Tamara. What do you believe in that really led you to have a focus on like post-scarcity, which maybe we'll get into? There's regeneration. What did you learn out of all of those experiences that really directed your passion or your role or your belief?
Oh, that's another big question. What I started with was really like going down the path of regeneration, right? Really understanding and going deep into things like forest gardens and polycultural systems in particular. And then I learned about water landscapes and how to regenerate larger pieces of land. And all of that we would put within like Tierramor's pillars, which we'll get to at some point, but all that's within the regenerative aspect of things, right? I did learn pretty quickly that there are many other very important, what I'd call like developmental aspects that we would be better served to better embody and know more about if we want to be in service to a more connected culture. For example, spiritual path. I wouldn't say I was not an atheist, but I was very much an agnostic. There's a book from Dawkins called The Selfish Gene that played a very big role. I majored in anthropology, and this was like one of the ones that they just handed out. And when I read this book, it like blew my mind because I was like, wow, we're just like, we're nothing more than DNA, and DNA just wants to propagate itself over time. And so this sort of like reductionist, materialist, very simplistic view of reality was very much part of my worldview as I was moving into this regenerative understanding. And it wasn't until I had my doors just like completely blown off by doing my first Vipassana retreat, where I was like, oh, it's just not true. It's just totally untrue. The world is so much bigger than that, and not outside, but inside. There's just so much to experience, actually. And there's so much to life, and there's so much, yeah, like to spirit, I guess is what you could, the best word for it. I was like, okay, this is obviously something which is very important that I've completely neglected up until now. And I was so grateful that I had some fun, crazy hippie friends that were like, bro, you should do it. The Vipassana. What is that? What is the Vipassana like? And, you know, and I
Was
heard
that
it like,
your entryway to like conscious experiences? Or
oh, totally.
that's
Yeah.
pretty intense for a first time.
Yeah, I am the person who likes to dive headfirst into weird things. That's for sure. It's like when I heard, wow, it was like 10 days in silence. That sounds insane. Yeah, let's do it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it was definitely insane. And I went, I think, maybe a little bit insane around day 3, day 4. But wow, I was absolutely never the same after that experience. And I'm so grateful to those people and to that experience for like forever changing my worldview. And so that now I've done many different things since then, more than probably 25 silent retreats since then, had a number at Tierramor already, and a very beautiful one actually recently, which was a tranquil wisdom insight meditation from Bhante Ananda. So beautiful. Anyway, that's another topic.
Yeah.
But that really is encapsulated in our ascendant pole at Tierramor now. So we've gone to regenerative, now we're in ascendant. We also have the descendant pole in Tierramor, which is really about increasing connection with others. So they're all about increasing connection. When we're increasing connection with nature, that's the regenerative pole. We're increasing connection with our capital S self, that's the ascendant, and we're increasing connection with others, that's the descendant. I learned a lot about that actually starting in Tamara, which is a project, how do they frame it? It's for the liberation of human sexuality or something like that. I'm not sure exactly what the terminology is, but it's pretty radical.
Okay.
Literally, there's a sort of ideology there that's Wilhelm Reich. He's got a book like this thick on orgasm. It's a bunch of Germans in Portugal, beautiful humans, generally speaking. Like, I love them. I have so many friends there. And like the ideology is literally, if you have enough sex, enough good sex, then you will stop the urge to create war. Because a lot of this, like in the 70s, came out of this sort of like backlash against World War II and like all the things that came from that. I landed there the first Sunday that I got there. I was like, okay, wow, this is so beautiful. Look at the lake. Look at all the different things that they're doing with the permaculture. I was so excited about just spending time with the pigs and understanding like how they were doing their water landscape system. And then I remember the first Sunday that I arrived. They have this thing called the aula. This is 15 years ago, by the way.
Yeah.
Which is like the largest, I think it's like the largest natural building on the Iberian Peninsula. And there's this guy, Dieter Doom, at the center of the stage. And this is being piped into my ear because he's speaking in German. I didn't understand German at the time. And he's basically saying the freedom of humanity depends on our ability to love and to fuck ourselves free, essentially. And I'm like,
what did he just say?
Like, where the fuck did I just land? And I was looking around at everybody around me and I'm like, I thought I was in a permaculture community. What is this place that I landed in? But there was so much beauty actually in landing in a place like that and being so surprised about where I was, because there was no information that I could see anywhere on the internet, certainly nothing in English, that would give me any indication that this is what this place was about. But because I was there, I was like, okay, I guess this is what's happening. So I'm going to have my croissants in the morning and go along with the program here, do the olive harvest for a few weeks and see what happens and learn more about what it is to be in connection and love and all the different things. And really beautiful program actually there. It opened my eyes so much. Of course, later I learned about a program called ISTA, which I've done a number of now, which I learned quite a bit about actually going very deep into the descendant aspect of things. The shamanic aspect is working with the energy, like our energy bodies. So it's really working with what's happening inside of us and learning to be with that. And sometimes to express that, not at somebody, but like to express that so it can be released in a helpful way, right? And learning about the drama triangle, boundaries, consent, desires, all these things that like go into what it means to really connect in a healthy way with other people, which might have something to do with sex and might just be like the most amazing cuddle puddle ever, because we're like super clear that, oh, this is like what we want, or oh, it's what we don't want. And we go do something that we do actually. But before then, I was so much in a program of, oh man, I had so many different programs. I learned so much from this. I'm forever grateful to Des and to Bruce and to Minta and to so many people that have played such a pivotal role in my
What was
life.
it like to free yourself in that way? I know that's not your focus and you're more focused in this ascend and descend and regenerate, but was there anything extremely liberating for you that really freed your soul to just be more infinite in those experiences?
I was running quite a few, shall we say, like unhelpful programs that were not serving me really, and really not serving anybody else. And it wasn't until I was basically put into, I call ISTA like a blender. It was just like thrown into this blender and you just get chopped into little pieces during the course of this week. And then you just get poured out into a different mold at the end. And you forever like a different person moving forward after that. There was just so many, usually like between 5 and 10 different big insights during the course of 1 week. More so than anything, it's really just, a dance of learning to stay in like the blue zone of development. That's what I refer to as like the happy place, where I know I'm pushing myself enough, but I'm not in the red zone where it's like, I'm going like into a trauma response, or I'm like in the green zone where I'm like bored, right? But where I'm like, okay, this is good. This is helpful for me. We're in a good trajectory, right?
Really good growth advice for any practice that you're doing is how do you find the zones and know when you're edging up against red or you're hitting boredom in the green, and where's that?
Yeah, this is like still a daily practice for me. It's really knowing, especially when I'm in environments like that, where am I on this? Just doing a check-in, especially if I'm getting some lights flashing and like internally is, oh, are these good ones? Meaning like, is this helping me? Am I moving in the right direction? Or am I in freeze? Am I in flight? Am I in fight? I have all those. What's happening with me? And sometimes I'll have to take a step back and be like, okay, we're not going to do whatever it is that we were doing before. And we're just going to do something else, or take a minute, or have an emotional release, or just meditate, or whatever the thing is that is helpful in that moment, which can be quite a few different things.
Awesome. We got tangented. We were talking about how after tomorrow, some things opened up, and I'd like to give you the space just to continue on this journey that we're on.
Yeah, I don't think I was a very good partner. Let's put it that way. I don't think I was certainly wasn't a very good lover. I don't think I was probably wasn't like a very good husband for a long time. And it took me really understanding more about what was happening inside of myself in order to actually show up in better relationship with others. And these tools really helped me do that and become, frankly, just a better version of myself.
You said you got put into this blender and spun out in 1,000 different pieces and then poured into this other mold. When did you start receiving insights, or how did it come about that you started thinking, I might want to create a property? Or what took you from knowing that version of you into this version of you, creator?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had the vision for something similar anyway. I actually, like, the first iteration was actually when I was living in the big island of Hawaii near La'akea, and I called it Fusion Village. And I wanted to make basically what I was talking about earlier, which is a community of people who are really focused on the land, half of them, and the other half are like focused on income generation, and they live together. It was a simplified version of Tierramor, and I was not ready to hold it then. I was really not. There was a lot that I had to learn. There was some fires that I had to go through in order to really step into what's necessary to hold a project like this.
I
That
just
was
celebrate you speaking to that, because I think sometimes we know what we want and we have this immediate gratification, like instant gratification. And even people that I know, and even myself, I find the places where I'm like, oh, I see this coming to life and I think I can rush it. And you realize that every moment, every day, every step is initiating you to the next. Was there any really big personal initiations? Maybe it's just because I work with a lot of men too, but sometimes that hard charging, we're gonna beeline it to this idea or this goal. So how does someone start to recognize the inner initiation process that they're in and respect that and move in sync with it?
This is not an easy or simple one. And I think I'd be lying, frankly, if I would be lying for sure if I said that I had the consciousness then to know it. It just
Mhm.
took failing, frankly. I put up a website, I wrote all the different things, but I had no idea what it was to cultivate internally the state that was necessary to hold something larger. And that really just meant, yeah, joy inside of myself, but also what it meant to create helpful, loving environments which help people thrive and produce beauty. That's what I look at as my job right now, is doing that. And that being said, I want to do my best to answer your question because it's a really beautiful question, and something that I've been wrestling with is that I certainly have been through a number of initiations, I would say, mostly by accident, mostly by my own naivete or stupidity, either one, where I just put myself into situations. Oops, that was, I didn't know that was going to happen, but here we are. And for example, it's really strange to think about this because we think about fraternities as something where they're just not the most beautiful image that comes to mind. Somehow we think about fraternities, right? We think about guys doing beer bongs, and for good reason, right? That's a lot of what it is. But I had a proper initiation in the fraternity that I pledged at UC Santa Barbara. And it was basically a week with no sleep. I ate very little and was tested 20 hours of the day, basically each day, and was pushed way past my limits of what I thought I was capable of physically and mentally. And I was certainly not very happy about that when I was doing it and when I was going through it. But oh my God, am I grateful for those guys pushing me way past what I thought I was capable of, right?
Mhm.
Without that initiation to let me know that actually mind is just, it's a signal, but it's not the end. It's not, I don't have to listen to my mind saying, I can't do this, or this is not possible, right? That's not necessarily true. It's almost usually not. So it is, can be helpful feedback. It can be certainly like a signal that we should take note of, but not always follow it. And learning to know when to let go of that signal and just continue forward or make a left and try something else, but to continue that's been a pretty valuable skill that really only came with this type of an initiation, actually.
I feel so much gratitude just to hear all of these nuggets, and I just really appreciate the initiatory process. And I think maybe sometimes we don't know what we don't know, like you said, naivete. And then the more times I get initiated to hold bigger things, the more I have a respect for, okay, what is required for then the next phase of this project, this community. So when did Tierramor start to come into your awareness more fully?
It was really a very gradual process. There was a pretty big gap in between that time in Tamara, right, till when I actually got to ISTA. And in that whole time in between, I was doing many different meditation retreats, mostly Dzogchen and Mahamudra retreats. That was really like the focus for me for many years, and had some really beautiful teachers that I'm super grateful for. But I was really focused on the ascendant, actually. That was the big focus for almost the whole time that I was married. And yeah, and so that was a big calling. And then actually my ex-wife was the first one to do Inista. She wanted to do it. And I was like, okay, go for it. If you want to, if that's something. That's how our relationship was, of like, if you really called to it, go for it, enjoy yourself. And it was only because she had such an amazing time and had so much benefit, frankly, in terms of like her happiness and her joy. And she said, you should do this. This would be great for you. And I would be like, okay. So I went and did one, then ended up doing 5 more, but it was
Whoa. Yeah.
yeah, before I like said about 3 years ago. But but I learned a lot. But the point is that there was waves of what was right for me in certain moments was really like a call inward, really like a call towards like developing more of like the connection with myself, to really understand more, to be in silence, to be closer to what's actually happening internally, to become more of an intronaut was the word that came to me during my first Vipassana, right? Instead of an astronaut. Oh, wow, so much of a universe inside. And then sometimes we're called more so to be out in connection with others, because that's where the juice is. That's where the life is, right? And so I was really just following like my flow of what I was being called to in that moment. That meant more connection with others, actually, at different times in my life. And so what I realized was that there was a number of different developmental aspects that were really beautiful, very important in their own way. And that in every community that I'd been to around the world, which is more than a dozen, each one of them did one of those things quite well, usually. And then they often would have one of the other things as well, but not all three. You would never see like descending and ascending, for example, like in the same community done well, like ever. You would see regeneration associated with both of those communities. And I was like, okay, that seems interesting. Why is that? Because to me, it feels like a complete life, one that feels like actually really in service to what feels possible in this world and what feels good for me, would have to have all of that in a community environment that was intentionally creating culture for that more beautiful world, right? Choosing either or was just didn't work. The last stop was a place called Pachamama, which you might have been to before. I'm not sure. It's also in Nosara, and I spent 3 years off and on there and love it, and realized I was not being fed on the descendant level like I really needed in that place, where I was like, I didn't feel like it was culturally acceptable to really like embody the level of connection that I knew was possible. And I was like, okay, I did this training called Haydn during COVID. And so we just created a little safe bubble together for that whole time. And then half of us left after the training and went down to Costa Rica and laid the foundations, the formations of what would become Tierramor. And some of my friends actually named Tierramor. It wasn't me that came up with the name. They were the ones that Like they had a little witch's crew. They're like, yeah, that's the name. And I was like, oh, okay, great. Cool. I like it.
Everybody's going to be on their own journey. Everyone's going to have their own initiations. But I do think at the end of the day, there's inner inspiration, there's inner guidance. There's something that really calls us to rise from inside to something bigger. Did it all come together more serendipitously?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So Post-Scarcity Institute has now become officially Samaranya, and the impulse is the same. And it's that we know that there is a more beautiful world possible, and let's employ the best technology possible in that pursuit of a beautiful regenerative future. Specifically with Samaranya, the idea here is that we see documented anywhere from 4 to 10x in terms of productivity, human productivity, both in calories and in nutrition from monocultures to polycultures. So polycultures will have that big of an increase over a monocultural piece of land. That's when you take one piece of land and you're employing like corn or wheat or soy or rice, and you put a polycultural farm essentially on that piece of land, you're going to see orders of magnitude better nutrition specifically from that piece of land. We are currently utilizing essentially like World War II infrastructure in the form of combine harvesters and farming equipment that's fantastic for one crop. Like it's been absolutely world changing for us to have like caloric abundance from these machines, right? But we're not currently employing the best of our technology in service to get the highest level of calories and nutrition, which is possible from being in right relationship with the land, utilizing the best of technology. So what we're trying to do at Samaranya is replace our eyes, our minds, and our hands with technology. Because again, with polycultural plots, with a human eye, mind, and hand, which is spending a lot of time and a lot of effort to manage this, we're seeing massive returns. We are not seeing those returns from monocultural. However, if we take, for example, like sensing equipment and have 24/7 understanding of what's actually happening in a lived environment, we're to a certain degree replacing our eyes, right? If we're employing, for example, things like machine learning and AI to interpret that data, then all of a sudden we're replacing part of what our mind can do, right? And eventually we hope to act on that data, not with human hands, but with things like drones and other specialized robotic machinery that can literally create abundant forests of food that are in service to increasing biodiversity and human productivity on the same plot of land, which was not possible with the existing technology. It's baby steps at Samaranya. There's only so much that we can do given our resources in Costa Rica. However, we want to incubate others that are on the path and give them land, give them resources, give them mentorship, and help them along on their way if they're doing one of those three things in service to building a polycultural system.
And can I ask, you've been all over the world, you've seen all different kinds of lenses and done all different kinds of things. What is your why? What is most important to you at this time? And why do you want to spend your life force energy really committing to this? This is like no small undertaking.
Yeah, and I can speak to my why. I'm a little hesitant to talk about what I think will happen because I know my tendency to get attached to these things. I have ideas, certainly. My my why is simply knowing, there's a deep knowing in my body, in my lived experience, that a more beautiful world is possible, to put it in the words of Charles Eisenstein, right? And it's simply, I'm at a point in my journey where it simply feels good to do my best to call that forward, to be in service to what I know deeply to be true inside of myself. That's what feels good, right? What doesn't feel good anymore is to have that knowing and to go and sit on a boat in the Pacific or whatever, go to the Ritz-Carlton and eat big brunches. There's nothing wrong with that, but doing that for long periods of time excessively and stuff like that, utilizing my privilege for these kinds of things is not, it just doesn't feel good. What feels good is serving this larger knowing and putting my resources, putting my experience, putting my gifts to work in service to this knowing. And that's it. It's because I've tried. Everything else doesn't feel good.
I love that. So you're actually just following what feels good.
That's it. There's a lot more to it, of course, but in the end, I like to work. I like to work in service to what I know is possible. The feedback mechanisms that I get that help me have a positive internal state, that makes me feel good about being a good father, what I think is a good father. I want to build a beautiful world for my kids to grow up in. Why wouldn't I do that? Why wouldn't I push the limit of what I know is possible and maybe fail? I've failed before many times, but it's not about whether I fail or not. It's about whether I try and I pick myself up afterwards, because failure is just, it's another learning opportunity, right? It's a bit cliche, but it's true.
I don't know if this sets you apart from every permaculture or regenerative land project, because I haven't explored them all, but you really are integrating technology and efficiency and productivity, which is not wasting time or resources or energy, along with biodiversity and being in right relationship with the land. And in my perspective, you're blending modern technology with sort of an ancient remembering of our relationship to the planet.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And yeah, it's exciting for me. And again, it's still little steps at this moment. I'm not like some other folks out there that are holding down 7 different businesses all at once. And I'm doing my best at the moment. And that's what feels good. So thank you for seeing me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing yourself. I feel like we got even some good adventurous stories that I wasn't expecting to hit on or plan on, but I'm glad we took some detours so I could really get to know you.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting to share a lot of what I shared today. That's what felt good. So that's what happened.
Here we are. I know. I was like, this is so much better. Is there anything that you want to leave anybody with who's on the path of awakening and learning to follow that nudge?
The advice that I would give if somebody wants advice from me after, I guess, listening to this whole thing now, is to really create space in your life, to create the space that's necessary if you're unclear of what it is that you want to do and what it is that you're called to do, to simply create space in your life. And that means to really be good to yourself, to take time. What I did is I gave myself a very tight budget to live on for a long time. It gave me a lot of peace of mind of knowing, okay, it doesn't actually matter if I'm not holding down a job because I'm just living in a very frugal way, which also gave me a lot of confidence because I was able to decouple this understanding of that I had at that moment, which was like, okay, happiness is tied to how much money I have or how extravagantly I'm living, which actually is just not true at all. So if we have that decoupling in our lived experience, so much more becomes possible, right? So much more freedom becomes possible because we have all of a sudden the courage to take risks that we wouldn't otherwise take, right? Because if those listening are anything like me, I felt trapped because I had this mortgage, because I had like a lot of responsibilities that I needed to hold down, like all these payments, all that stuff, right? It wasn't until I let go of those things and stepped away and just was like planting trees and getting up at 5 a.m. with the sun and just do that day after day to create space to reorient internally, to be like, actually, what's important for me? To rediscover from my own internal compass, what do I actually want? And for everybody, that's going to be completely different. Maybe that means like a road trip for them, or maybe that means whatever the thing is that calls to you. Don't drive yourself into a financial hole and create space. Don't be afraid like I was. I literally was so afraid of having a gap on my LinkedIn profile, like where I wasn't employed, gainfully employed. Like that was like, oh, it's terrifying. And I have to answer that question in interviews to come. Now I celebrate that I have like 6 years of nothing. It's like, I did nothing. I celebrated on my LinkedIn page. That's also a privilege to have, but to get enough space to really just orient from a deeper place than that which is of habit and of the mind. When we can let go of those two things and find a deeper orientation, find that deeper compass inside of ourselves, that will change everything in our lives.
Thank you so much. I really appreciated having you and hearing your story today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for sharing this moment with me on the show. I'm hoping that something you heard today will root deeper into your heart and ripple out into your life in ways you can't even imagine. If this episode moved you, inspired you, or brought you closer to your truth, I'd love for you to share it with someone you know, or leave a review to help this work reach more souls who are ready to awaken. And before we go about the rest of our day, let's take one last breath together. Inhale deeply into your heart. And exhale to send gratitude out to your entire body. Until next time, may you walk gently, live boldly, and trust in the wisdom of your heart.